So hi, and welcome to another part of the IAP's interview series. Today we're speaking with Samuel Goda, who's a project manager and researcher at the Slovak Foreign Policy Association in Bratislava, an assistant professor and vice dean for development at the University of Economics in Bratislava. So thank you, Samuel, for speaking with us today. Today we'll be speaking about Gagauzia and sort of the political situation in the region and also its relations to the capital. So to start, I wonder if you could speak a little bit to generally how would you characterize the political situation in Gagauzia today, its relations to Chisinau, especially given the recent political turbulence in the capital, and maybe also what have been sort of key changes or how the situation has changed in recent years, if there have been any sort of milestones.
Hi, Patrick. And first of all, thanks a lot for having me online now today. And so thanks also for picking up Gagauzia as one of the topics, because I think that's a very interesting region where many interests meet and been mostly neglected when it comes to expert discussions. So thanks a lot for that. And so, the situation in Gagauzia, the political one, and the relations with Chisinau, I would say complicated. The political situation in Gagauzia is, I would say, stable. On the hands of Irina Vlach, who is the Bashkan, the head of executive committee in autonomous region of Gagauzia. Basically, the political power is mostly in her hands. She won this race for a second time already, and without major problems. So she's having a major popular support. Then, however, the relations with Chisinau are complicated, and complicated for almost 25 years, I would say. Recently, they are described basically by the attempt to resolve the status of autonomy for Gagauzia, because you have the law, which says that Gagauzia has its own territorial autonomy, but the law is very vague and leaves a lot of space for different interpretations of this law. So there is a interparliamentarian commission, for example, or group between Chisinau and Comrade, and it's mediated by CMI, by the Finnish organization. And so within this group, they're trying to resolve these problems and make kind of a harmonization between the Gagauzian law and central government law. And in many cases, it went very well. They have identified these areas of problems, but on the other hand, they failed to adopt this, as they call it, Gagauzian package on national level, because there was, in my opinion, there was no interest simply to do that. And it was neither under the rule of Plachotniuk, nor of Sandu, and neither now under socialists, basically. So it seems like in many cases, this might be for benefit of some groups in Moldova and Gagauzia, not having this set. But on the other hand, you have at least identified areas which are problematic, and also you have some solutions on the table, just failing to adopt them on central level.
Okay, great. And then just touching on that quickly, you mentioned, so there's been a lot of sort of government change in the capital. Do you think there's been different policies by the different parties who are ruling in response to Gagauzia, or has there been pretty consistent policy from the capital towards the region?
Excuse me, could you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, so the different political parties that have been in power in Chisinau in the past couple of, years now, have there been sort of different policies towards the region, or have they been pretty consistent in trying to settle the autonomy question and to reach a solution, or have there been different approaches depending on which party has been in power?
Rhetorically, always socialists say they were most in favor of Gagauzia and Gagauzians and Gagauzan nation, etc. And on the other hand, also vice versa, Gagauzians show a lot of support for Socialist Party. But that's only on declarative level. When it comes to real political steps, I wouldn't say that the interest is equal among all political parties, and the interest is very, very low. In 2014, there you had this Gagauzia referendum, very famous one, which attracted then a lot of attention to Gagauzia region. So as a political step to attract, to bring interest back to the region was, I would say, very nice move. But of course, not completely in legal framework of the whole Republic of Moldova. But again, I mean, when it comes to political parties, they do not have a real interest to do something with Gagauzia, because basically they are somehow finding themselves in a vicious circle of own political games on central level and neglecting Gagauzia. However, still, I would like to underline this, it seems to be an interest of many groups down in Gagauzia as well as in Chisinau to have this state of affairs and status quo. So it might appear as kind of a pretending to do some things, but not really doing them.
Okay, great. And then, so next question, what do you see as the greatest challenges in political, socioeconomic, or security terms for the region's development? Are there particular issues that still need to be resolved within the region or sort of federal level? And what would you characterize those as?
Yeah, there are huge challenges. I mean, first of all, again, there's the whole status of autonomy for Gagauzia, because there you have financial terms, financial issues, territorial issues, the role of state language and education, and etc. So it's very complex. But if to pick some social, political, and economic challenges, I would say it's brain drain from Gagauzia. Even though Gagauzia is just, if I'm right, it's the only region in Moldova with positive birth rate, but still the brain drain is huge. Then overall the level of quality education is really bad. The infrastructure, of course, roads and physical infrastructure per se, is also very low. And yes, the development of business and small businesses in general, these, I would say, are the biggest challenges for the Gagauzin region. But the problem is that many times these are interconnected and combined. So the whole issue of regional development of Gagauzia and having this goal where to go and having concrete tools how to get there are missing. So there are attempts to work on that, but it takes time, it's not very effective and mismanaged sometimes. So yes, these are the biggest challenges.
Okay, great. And then kind of like diving into the social side, how have Moldova's minorities policies, as well as the language disputes in the region, including in Gagauz and Russian and Romanian, impacted the political situation? And do you see any areas for optimism or growth in any of these areas?
Yes. Traditionally, Gagauzians have very positive attitudes towards Russia and Russian language. And on the other hand, a quite negative one, I would say, towards Romanian language and Romania in general. And they are very suspicious towards Chisinau, because as they say, that is their historical memory. Language, the question of language, for example, when you are on the streets of Comrat and you want to get in trouble, then just say something about Romanian language in Moldova, because they say there is no Romanian language, there is Moldovan language, and they of course express it in Russian. But this comes across as problem on two levels. First, it's political level. So when you want to cause a problem, or when you want to turn attention from the real problems, then you play the language card. Not only in Gagauzia, but in different regions across Moldova. But in Gagauzia, it plays very, very well. And then on practical level is education, because in schools in Gagauzia, the state language, they call it, Romanian language, is not promoted well. Basically, the educational system is based in Gagauzia is based on Russian language, and even sometimes Russian study materials, which are brought to Gagauzia as part of the humanitarian aid of Russia, which is of course problematic. But in my opinion, this should be of concern of central government to do something with that and to meet Gagauzians halfway in this process. So this is, I would say, minority issues. And when it comes to law and policies, I would say they are quite fine. And of course, it could be better. But what the real problem is the implementation of these policies. And again, speaking in political terms, is the recognition of Gagauzians. They see that as a big problem because they do not feel themselves as first-class citizens. They do not feel themselves as being true part of Moldova because Chisinau is not paying enough attention to them, and etc. So these are the political, rather, consequences of being of Gagauzian minority in Moldova. But people-to-people contacts, no problem. Of course, there are issues when you are in Chisinau speaking to young people and they are wondering whether they have mosques down in Gagauzia because they believe Gagauzians are Muslims. So even within the country, you have like a knowledge about Gagauzia, which is, again, quite problematic and surprising. But still, I would say these are the issues the central government should be worried about and should pay more attention to, because otherwise these could be used in political games and subjected to very different kind of interpretation and blaming the other side for own problems.
Okay, great. So you touched on a couple of them already, but I wonder if you could speak to sort of the role of external actors, including Russia and Romania, as well as also maybe Turkey and the EU, sort of what their interest is in the region, what degree they're involved, and sort of if you view any areas for some of these actors to have a more constructive or possibly even destructive impact on the region in terms of engagement or development or sort of external support, and how that sort of looks today.
Exactly, those countries which you mentioned are the most important, are the biggest players in Gagauzia. I would start with Russia because it has the long track history of working with Gagauzians, mostly in a field of humanitarian aid, just as the others as well. What is the difference? The difference is the language and the approach of Russians when it comes to humanitarian aid to Gagauzia. I will provide an illustration maybe later on, if I do not forget. And so Russia is paying quite a lot of interest and attention to Gagauzia compared to other regions of Moldova, of course. Then you have these economic issues, like, for example, having access of wines made in Gagauzia in Russian market and signs like these, or not having any troubles of Gagauzians to get visa to go and work in Russia. So these are the signs which cost almost nothing for Russians and mean a lot to Gagauzians. So when it comes to strategic place, Russian Federation does that very well when it comes to cost and effect. So, however, things have changed in recent years, mostly because of the economic situation in Russia, which cannot afford now to invest many financial resources to Gagauzia as it was before. But of course, they still do. They bring reading books, handbooks, and study materials to schools and etc. Or they give a kind of a very concrete aid in form of tractors or in form of agricultural products to Moldova, which again, to Gagauzia, which again Gagauzians understand very well, because they know what is agriculture, so they know what is tractor. But then, and I'm moving to EU, EU started to pay more attention to Gagauzia mostly in 2014 after this Gagauzian referendum. And I think in two ways, which both are very well. EU itself, giving, for example, more development aid to Gagauzia, and the second level is making pressure or raising this question on central government to do something with the region. So EU started to work more with Gagauzian, both civil society, which is very underdeveloped. There are many active people, but civil society as such is not developed basically in our Western terms. And also they started to work with executive committee of Gagauzia. And under Irina Blach, they have this motto which says Gagauzia 360 degrees. So they are open, as they say, to everyone, which you can read as, yes, we have no problem taking money from anyone. So basically, but okay, rational, we have to deal with that. So the EU is starting and did some great projects in Gagauzia, both with civil society and with executive committee. But there is one problem, and that is a long-term commitment of European Union and European Union countries. If we want to be compared with Russia or Turkey in our humanitarian or development aid, we need to have a commitment to stay in Gagauzia for a longer time, because Russians are doing that for 25 years. Turks, basically, as well. And EU started only recently. And also, it takes time. Everything you do in Gagauzia, which is a very conservative and closed community, needs time, because in these terms, it is very real. We need to win their hearts and minds. So, and they do not like to do things quickly. And finally, Turkey, for example, their humanitarian aid is mostly connected with business and construction, infrastructure, as well as with culture, of course, because Gagauzians are being a Turkic-speaking nation. So this is the labor division between the main actors. And I didn't mention Romania because I count Romania as part of the EU. So you have some EU countries which are more present in Gagauzia than the others, but I'd like to turn attention to the EU as a whole, because it makes more sense. So the Russians, having their long track record of working there, but recently not spending a lot of money, but still being very cost effective. Then Turkey, investing a lot of in infrastructure and in kind of business, maybe, but again, not Western type of business. And then you have the EU, which tries to work in different field, which Gagauzans, when we say in general, like general population, still might have problems to understand, because it's different approach than the Russians and Turks have. But in my opinion, the EU approach is good. But again, to sum up, it needs commitment to stay in Gagauzia, to invest in Gagauzia, and to work with Gagauzians.
Great. And then just to delve in a little deeper, so you mentioned a few times the 2014 referendum, and I wonder if you could explain, first of all, what that was, and then also sort of the importance of that referendum, and also maybe the election of Irina Vlach, and sort of in relations to Russia specifically. And then also a few years ago, I think there was this law passed on Russian propaganda and not allowing Russian media. And could you discuss how that has been impacted or responded to in Gagauzia, and how that sort of the impact has been?
Maybe just quickly on Russian propaganda in Gagauzia is not perceived as Russian propaganda, because again, Russian media are very popular because Russian is common language for Gagauzians. So basically, the news they receive are in Russian, and they accept it as just as news. This is the information. So very few of them got information from somewhere else, including national broadcasting, which in case it's in Romanian, simply elderly people or people living in rural areas of Gagauzia simply do not understand. They do not watch. So they watch Russian TVs. And then you had a ban on some Russian TV stations. But what did Gagauzians do? They bought themselves a specific satellite, so they basically receive the news still. Of course, they do not. I'm not sure if they do it legally or illegally. Maybe there is a kind of a limbo in this case, but they still listen to Russian media and Russian news, and they trust it. Then going back to your first question regarding the referendum, that was huge. That was super interesting, because basically the most important question was if Gagauzians approve to secess from Moldova in case Moldova loses its sovereignty. Now the question is, what is losing sovereignty? Because there are some political some opinions that Moldova could join Romania, which is a red flag for any Gagauzian. Immediately they would say no. And for them, basically you have this Soviet and now Russian narrative labeling someone fascist. So Romanians are fascists. So fascists are the worst people. So basically we want nothing to have in common with them. Put in very, very simple, but this is the mind of rural Gagauzian. And then, but it also, and this seems to be more likely to be understood in this context, it's Moldova joining EU. Because according to some interpretation, that would be losing part of sovereignty. And that is a huge card. That is an important movement. Implications, several of them. I believe that the most important ratio behind this was to get the traction. Really to say that we are here, Gagauzians, and here are our interests, which we have very clear, mostly in financial terms. And you should count with us. Why? Because in case you want, we leave Moldova, and we have a big brother, just Russia, supporting us. But now coming to Russia, I do not want to say, and I do not see the hand of Moscow everywhere. And I do not believe that Russian engagement was directly behind this move, but definitely it does not go against their interests. And what is in Russian strategic interest is Moldova not joining the EU at all. Just the same as you have in Ukraine or Georgia. Basically the same story. But again, the question is whether the Gagauzin referendum was in their hands or not. And I do believe it was not. But again, it is not going against Russian interests. And of course, then the Russian narrative was, yes, Gagauzins are a nation, they have their autonomy, and they should have the right to defend themselves. There you go. So, but again, since that time, international community heard there is kind of a Gagauzia. They started to learn about Gagauzia, and they also started to work and invest more in Gagauzia. So from this point of view, again, as a strategic move, it was nice, because since then Gagauzins have more money coming to the region, more interest, more modernization, and etc. But again, I mean, it's very vicious. It was a very vicious step to do that. But it also triggered this process of having it clear when it comes to law on autonomy, which means what is the share of autonomy on central budget, how much money they can receive from central budget, what is their autonomy when it comes to social sphere, education, and etc., infrastructure, then which villages or regions can join or exit Gagauzia. And mostly that basically now Gagauzia, even though they're called autonomous region, their way of self-government is more similar to any other different region of Moldova. So their interest to have more competencies is legitimate and also legit when it comes to their autonomous status. So again, I mean, 2014 referendum had many implications. It started some positive processes, but again, there is a huge risk of some other actors, external, exploiting this in the future again, because the result of the whole referendum was, yes, we can leave Moldova in case Moldova loses part of its sovereignty.
Okay, great. And then, you've mentioned sort of other regions of Moldova, and obviously the region that seems to get the most attention, region sort of, I guess, in quotations or depending on interpretation. But I wonder if you can compare Gagauzia to Transnistria and sort of the experience now 25, 30 years after Moldova's independence, how the experience of the two regions have been in terms of success and political or economic or security terms. How do you sort of compare these two entities?
Yeah, great question too, because this is now about part of the discussion, whether Gagauzin example could be used as an example to follow about Transnistria. Some say yes, some say no. Nowadays, what Gagauzians are doing, and Irina Vlach, is that attracting money, investment, and interest to Gagauzia. They have in their own forum where many stakeholders meet. They go and travel, mostly to Russian regions, but still okay. So they have these partnerships. Europeans are coming to Gagauzia and sharing their expertise, their experience, and etc. Something Transnistrians do not cherish at all. So in this case, it might be interesting. However, and that is again the problem. Transnistrians have it pretty clear when it comes to their own status, but Gagauzians do not, because I have mentioned several times this law on autonomy, which is vague. So first, Gagauzians would have to settle that, and then have some concrete, specific fruits of the process that they have started, something feasible, tangible for Transnistrians. And maybe at that time, at that moment, Transnistrians start to think about this kind of model. But in my opinion, it's not that easy at all, because then you have the engagement of Russian Federation, which is completely different and strategically different in Gagauzia and in Transnistria. In Transnistria, you have armed forces, you have a Russian armed forces. Basically, that says a lot. That's one of the most important things. And Transnistria is not autonomous at all in taking in taking decisions about their own political fate. So it's not in Tiraspol, it is in Moscow. So even though in Tiraspol would like to join Moldova, or would like to have the conflict settlement based on Gagauzian example, it has to be approved not in Tiraspol, but in Moscow. So, and that is the biggest challenge, I would say.
Okay, and then so I wonder actually if you could give a quick sort of an intro into GAMCON and sort of the project that you were leading in the region, and then sort of in light of that, what role sort of do you view for civil society and young people in the region or Moldova more broadly, sort of for whether for conflict resolution, for development, sort of how do you what sort of area do you view these filling?
Happy to do so, sure. Thank you for the opportunity too. The Slovak Foreign Policy Association, together with NGO Youth of Gagauzia and Comrade State University, we implemented a project called GAMCON, Gagauzian Modernization Convention, in the region of Gagauzia. It was financed by European Commission, EuropeAid, and International Visegrad Fund, Slovak Gate, and Kingdom of Netherlands. And it was one of several projects financed by EU or EU countries implemented in Gagauzia. And there was, I would say, quite nice division of labor, because, for example, we did it in social sphere. And then you had another project called SART, which was very, very popular. And that one was in agricultural sector. Then another one was working with executive committee and building their capacities and etc. and modernization and new approaches toward strategic planning. But again, some of these things are not that tangible for Gagauzians. Again, when we speak and think about regional development and strategies and actions plan and kind of a more thinking, and then you have tractor, they see tractor, they understand tractor more. But then you have a community of young people, mostly young people, which are mostly also critical towards EU, but they are very open towards modernization. They see that they can do something and that things work somewhere else. So why they are not working in Moldova or in Gagauzia. So what we tried to do with GAMCON was to work in basically three main pillars. The first one, we introduced our Slovak know-how when it comes to engagement of civil society into decision-making processes and what we call national convention. It was a structure of working groups working in different different areas, and civil society and executive committee, based on equality and dialogue. And the Gagauzians have chosen 4 topics which were of interest for them in social sphere. It was regional development, youth and sport, education and culture, and one more. I do not remember now. Sorry. But basically, it was based on their own interests. Like, these are the areas that we think we could change, and they need to be changed. So that was the first pillar, these working groups, and working with civil society as well as with executive committee, which is the self-governing body in Gagauzia. And then the second pillar was working with young people, because the problem is that, as I told you, about the brain drain. So young people do not see any future in Gagauzia, and Moldova too. Basically, a lot of countries face this problem, but in Gagauzia and Moldova, it is I would say, even a security problem. So we wanted to tell them that if you see some kind of problem in your own community, you do not have to wait for somebody. I mean, just, you can do it. You can have your own vision into that. So if you do not see any perspective, just create it yourself. And of course, so we started this educational program, and we also gave them an opportunity to change something in communities through some kind of small finances, which they could get. And finally, which was very interesting as well, was supporting local community per se. So we launched a call for proposals in social sphere for villages, for NGOs, academia, unions, whoever wanted to join. Just it was meant to be active in a social sphere, not in business, because business was started, as I told you before. And it went very, very well. So at that moment, we combined 2 things. Through that call for proposals for local communities, we gave them something tangible, something they could see. There were reconstructions of some buildings, of public places. We also supported some initiatives working with people with disabilities, and etc. So it was for the first time, as we received the feedback, that EU came in with a direct response to their direct needs. So that was very, very interesting. It was the first project in general when it comes to social sphere in the social area in Gagauzia. Then we're still working in these working groups. They have developed a strategy when it comes to informal education, wine tourism, which is super interesting for Gagauzia and kind of modernization a little bit. Then youth engagement and youth policy as well. So, and social infrastructure. That was the 4th working group for young families. And now it is on the hands of Ispolkom, this executive committee, whether they will adopt it or what to do with that. But they have already started. They have taken some ideas and implementing them. So it was a really interesting journey to work with Gagauzians, to see that basically, yes, they are conservative, but at the same time, very capable. When you have a general interest to help, they are also very open. But again, what they want and what is also very, very needed is this long-term commitment. So, yeah, GAMCON was kind of a starting point, kind of a trigger, which started something, which gave them idea that, yeah, things could be done and we can change something as citizens. But yeah, they need more support, not only financial, but also in expertise and moral support too. So yeah, we have started something, and just now it's up to EU or EU countries to decide whether they want to stay in Gagauzia and work with Gagauzians or not.
Okay, great. And then finally, the last question, just sort of turning sort of to the present day. Do you have any insight sort of into how the ongoing pandemic has impacted the region, and particularly maybe its relations to Chisinau or external actors, if any of those have been involved in supporting the region during the ongoing COVID-19?
Yeah, pandemic. Several implications again. I mean, first of all, the health system in Gagauzia or in Moldova in general is not well developed. So it got hit. Around 20% of people infected are medics, which that says a lot about the problem. There are around 6,500 people infected now, but the policies of the government or how they were implemented and applied by the citizens, that was a huge problem too. For example, they also had restrictions to wear masks and to maintain a social or a distance when meeting. And then you have president visiting comrade and standing side by side by other people, not wearing any mask and not maintaining the distance at all. So basically, the question is, what is the example of leaders towards their own citizens? And again, it says a lot about the working of the whole country. So leaders, institutions are not very responsible, are not strong enough to be followed by people. And yes, so this is one of the biggest problems. But in Gagauzia, the situation seems pretty fine. The question is about number of tests, which are not very high. So when you have not enough tests, then you have low numbers of people infected. But yes, so the current situation, maybe on a social level, this is interesting. That people in Moldova in general, and in Gagauzia even more, they like to go to public places. They like to be social and etc. And even and they are very outgoing when it comes to exterior. And in these, even in the short time period, they found out again how important this is for them. So I think that after the restrictions got eased in the near future, I would say again a lot of Gagauzians will be on the streets, and many exterior activities will be in place and will be taking place. So in our minds, maybe the implication of COVID was to move or to do something in online space, to work more there and to provide innovations. But in Gagauzia, it's like, yeah, we want more social contact. Online was fine, but not too much, and just go back and have a glass of wine somewhere and in a park and chat. So again, different, a little bit of different approach. But thank God, it is getting better. But again, around 20% of the people hit by the infection were medics.
Okay, perfect. So I think we'll wrap up here. Thank you so much for your insights. I think you did an excellent job, both from historical sort of developments to the present day, and from sort of the general trends in the region to specific issues and relations to the capital and to external actors. So thank you so much for your insights and perspectives, especially on a region that I think, to your point, is not so well covered. So thank you so much for taking the time to speak today, and we really appreciate your
with highest pleasure, Patrick, and thanks a lot for your questions and for your interest in Gagauzia, because again, I think that it is one of those regions, and Moldova being one of those countries, which are kind of a petri dish, or this litmus paper, so where things are tested and then you can see them somewhere else, both in positive and negative ways. So yeah, thanks a lot for having an eye on Gagauzia, and yeah, thanks a lot for the whole series about this Eastern Europe and Balkans within International Peace Institute. So yeah, thanks a lot again, and wish you good luck.
Thank you so much. Okay, thank you. Bye.
Bye.